Okay, the next part of speech we're going to take a look at here are prepositions. Now, prepositions are sometimes an undervalued part of speech in the English language. You don't really talk about them a lot, but they actually are really important in helping us understand how a noun can relate to another noun or verb. So let's take a look at a few examples here, right? First example we see is a book about history, where the preposition is about. Okay, and what it does is it helps us understand or connect the two nouns, book and history. And remember, history is a concept, and so it is a noun. Okay, we might not be able to touch history, we might not be able to feel history or see history, but it is a concept, and so it is a noun. The key thing here that what this video is going to focus on is prepositions. Right, so this is the preposition about, and it connects us or tells us the relationship between two nouns. Looking at the other examples, it's always the same idea, right? These prepositions connect our nouns for us. So if I say the snack before dinner, well, it tells us when the snack is eaten in relationship to dinner. The shop on the corner, the change in your pocket, the train at 12:15, and the list of players. Right? So the purpose of this is to help everyone identify when do you see a preposition, right? How to help identify a preposition in a sentence. It's going to be the word that connects or relates to nouns or a verb. Okay? The next step, though, is to understand how will this help us on the SAT or ACT or any kind of standardized test. Okay, so two things I'd like you guys to remember here. First is that one of the most common prepositions we used is of. Right, we see it here, the list of players. So I'm going to copy this down actually. The list of players. Now, what a lot of SAT and ACT questions ask us about is what is the proper verb here? Should I use is or are to make this sentence correct? Now, if we just read this, the list of players is missing or the list of players are missing. If you read it really quickly, or let's say you don't know about prepositions, you might think that players is actually our subject. And players is plural because of the S at the end. So we might pick are as our verb, right? Plural subject, plural verb. But that's where the second rule comes in that's really important, which is knowing that a prepositional phrase will never contain a subject. Right? So what is a prepositional phrase? It's the preposition, like of, plus the noun. Right, so preposition plus its noun equals a prepositional phrase. So here, the prepositional phrase is of players. And what we can do with of players is actually completely ignore it. Okay? Because it will never contain the subject, we don't even take that into consideration when we're trying to decide which verb we want to use. So because of players is not going to contain my subject, it's the prepositional phrase, my subject then is list. And because list is singular, my verb is going to be is. So the recap here is that a prepositional phrase will always begin with a preposition such as of plus another noun. These prepositional phrases never contain the subject. So don't get tricked by that on the SAT or ACT. Instead, we can just cross it out. We can completely ignore it, and then that will help us focus in on what our subject is. Once we focus in on the subject, we can determine what type of verb we need to use. Okay? So the idea of subject-verb agreement is pretty important on all standardized tests, and we're going to see a few kind of tricky examples here. Right? Most of the times when we have two or more subjects, we call it a compound subject, and those will usually use a plural verb. So if we take a look at the first example here, we have sugar, which is our first subject, and flour, which is our second subject. Because there are two, we would say are needed for the recipe. The next example says pepperoni, first subject, and cheese, second subject. So it's also are great on a pizza. But the next example is where it gets a little bit tricky. It says corned beef and cabbage. And for a lot of people who have maybe not tried this dish, they don't know that it's a traditional meal in Ireland. But what I could use is the context clue here, which says that this is a meal. Right? Meal, by the way, is singular. And so because it's singular, we are actually going to use the singular verb here. Now, it might seem a little tricky because you might say, well, corned beef and cabbage, it's two things, right? But really, this is the name. This is no longer two food groups, but this is actually a name or a title. And because it's considered as one dish or one meal, we use a singular verb for it, is. The next example here is actually a trick question. So there isn't actually a right answer here because the creator and producer could be the same person. In which case we would use is. Or it could be two separate people, right? In which case we would use are. So this is definitely a trick question. Either one of these would be acceptable, but to be honest, you will never see this on an SAT or ACT because it is a trick question. All right. Our last one here is probably the most interesting, which is when we use the word nor and also when we use the word or. Okay. It says neither my dad nor my brothers. And when we use this word nor or, we always use the last subject to determine our verb. So here the last subject is my brothers, and because that's plural, I'm going to use the verb know. So it'd be neither my dad nor my brothers know how to ski. Interestingly enough, I could flip this and I could say either my dad or my brothers. I'm sorry. I meant to change the order of these. So if I change the order and say either my brothers or my dad, then it would be knows how to ski. And the reason this sentence changed, right? It's almost exactly the same, except that I swapped the two nouns. Swapping the order of the two nouns does change my verb, right? It changed it from know, which is the plural verb, to knows, which is the singular verb. So please remember that. That's a really interesting kind of unique rule in English, which is that when you use or nor, you always want to use the last subject to determine the plurality or what the right verb is.